Shimin Says on the G1 podcast.
Welcome to Shimin Says on the G1 podcast. I'm GP.
I'm Cathy.
And this is the first edition since the very first edition. It is the third or fourth week. I think we agreed this is the fourth week of June.
Fourth week.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird starting date. It's the fourth week of June. We're actually coming back from hiatus. We took a few weeks off because the co-host I had at the time moved on to graduate school, but Cathy has decided to step in, and hopefully it'll be
a long
just
term
to the sky from here, right?
Okay.
And yeah, so if this is your first time tuning in, Shimin Says is the G1 podcast's current affairs centric segment. What we do is we kind of give you a digest of the biggest news stories over the last few weeks. We're hoping to do this bi-weekly, but the difference is we're giving it to you with an emphasis on how Koreans actually feel about these topics, where we're featuring their voices mainly through internet comments. The first one, actually, if you've been in Korea, and I don't know how big this is elsewhere, but if you've been in Korea, you can't go anywhere without hearing about the Gangnam murder case. Mm-hmm. We're not talking so much about the Gangnam murder itself, but more about the issues underlying there, the under the surface issues, kind of talking about misogyny, mm-hmm. which is a really hot topic. People have been saying that this is going to be the summer of feminism in Korea. So to get us started, we're going to give you a brief synopsis of the Gangnam murder, but then we'll be heading into the meat of it, the misogyny. So, Cathy, what do you got for us?
Okay, so I'll share the details about this murder case first, and then, as you mentioned, we're going to move on to the topic or the question of whether or not this incident was actually a misogynistic violence crime case or not.
I certainly have my own opinions, but let's get the facts first.
Okay, so what happened was on June 17th, the suspect surnamed Kim, who was 34 years old, stabbed a 23-year-old young woman at a unisexual bathroom in a building beside exit number 10 of Gangnam Station in southern Seoul, certainly the most populated area in the city. The suspect Kim and the victim had never met before, but the suspect killed the victim because she was a woman, and women had always looked down on him. And the suspect actually waited for an hour and a half outside the bathroom, letting 17 men pass by unharmed, and killing the one woman that walked in. So this stated motive for killing a random innocent woman stirred up an angry public response, especially from other women who created this big memorial wave nationwide. And another factor behind this wave is that there's this recognition of the widespread misogyny, especially on online sphere, propagated by internet community sites such as Ilbe Sewer House and alike. The response after this accident on that website was quite different from the general public's responses.
Yeah,
so maybe it's worthwhile to talk about that as well.
Of course, the public response, the memorial, if you didn't catch that or if you just have missed this story altogether, is actually the sticky note, the post-it note memorial on the exit itself, Gangnam Exit 10, where people would just write really quick blurbs about how they felt about it, and then they put it up there. Primarily women, primarily very empathetic responses. But let's move on, right? Okay, so there are two ways to view this crime. One as simply an act of a man out of his right mind. I heard that he has a history of mental illness.
Yeah, he has been suffering from schizophrenia for a couple of years, so for a long time, relatively.
Okay, so there's one way of viewing it, and the other is a manifestation of misogyny, right? Let's get some details about both of those arguments.
Okay, so let's first look at how the police ruled the case. So Seoul Socho police station, after investigating the case, said that its preliminary profiler interview found no specific cases of the suspect having been victimized by women, but added that Kim, the suspect, appears to have felt victimized due to paranoia because he's been suffering from this schizophrenia for a long time. And so this ruling basically is putting more weight on the individual as the mentally disturbed by this specific disease, and that's the reason why.
Yeah, his own personal circumstances,
right.
and not necessarily a societal thing, right?
Right. However, I've mentioned the fact that this suspect had let 17 men just pass by unharmed, and that's hard to. That clearly shows how his target was specifically women.
Yeah, I mean, after one or two guys, you might have been like, okay, well, maybe he just picked like third one's the loser here, but 17 is.
That's
wow.
what the surveillance camera caught, and it's really hard to look at the case the other way.
Yeah, It's hard to fight against that.
Right.
But there's plenty of, rhetoric about this actually being a manifestation of misogyny, right?
Yeah. So a lot of South Koreans are seeing the attack as an example of a misogyny. And as you mentioned, there's the whole, memorial wave, especially outside the exit number 10, where there's, all kinds of post-its and flowers. And many of the memos are actually from, other women that could have been victimized, in the same
Anyone
situation.
could have been in
Exactly.
that situation, Gangnam, whatever time of night, I need to use the restroom, right? It's a unisex restroom. You don't really think about that. That's pretty commonplace here in Korea.
Yeah, it is. And so a lot of these messages actually read, similar posts, messages like, I've only survived by luck, I'm angry at this reality. And so we can certainly read the general public's angry,
Their emotion there.
Emotional response there, mostly stemming from sympathy, among other potential
I
victims.
feel that right now, I only survive by luck. If you're tuning in via the YouTube version of this podcast, my skin is actually showing goosebumps.
Wow.
That it's a very telling phrase. I've only survived by luck, and that's not something anyone should ever have to think.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to definitely delve more into that with some stats later, but just to add a couple more comments onto that.
Professors from academia have been speaking up too, right?
Right. So Chungang University professor Lee Na-young said that the case is clearly motivated by the suspect's hate against women in general, because, just the fact that we just mentioned that 17 men were able to survive.
Yeah, but that reasoning, this misogyny reasoning, there's an underlying reasoning there too, right? It's just it's not about this one man, it's about society, right?
Yeah.
What did the professor say about those underlying causes?
Right. So she thinks that what's actually more critical to understand here is that how the society responded to the incident. In other words, we really must look into why South Koreans have taken this issue as a symbolically misogynistic societal problem rather than the other way around.
So she actually focuses on the response to it and not the underlying, not the background for it. That's interesting.
Well, it's kind of related, because by looking at how the Koreans have reacted to the incident, it shows the underlying societal problem that we have maybe not brought up to surface before. And so another comment that she added here is actually from her analysis of the case. She thinks that the case touched off such a passionate response because South Korea is much of a society that tolerates, general gender discrimination, and especially in recent 5 years, we're going to get to this statistics in a little bit. But women have suffered from more violence than before, and hate towards women and the disadvantage against women in Korea is deeply rooted and has been accumulated over years. And we can clearly see that an incident like this really shows how that hate against women has been accumulated to the point where it actually reaches...
We're at boiling point. We're at critical mass.
Actual violence.
I've seen a lot of things. I remember in my first year in Korea, I lived in Ulsan, and I saw a man dragging a woman into a car.
What?
And at the time, I didn't do anything because I just didn't know my place in the society. I'm not sure I would have done anything now. I might try to intervene now. I have seen a lot of things that would substantiate this kind of this sentiment of, wow, things are really getting tense between genders, right? Let's kind of quantify those things with some stats.
So the rate of women victimized in the 4 chief types of violent crime, that is murder, robbery, arson, and rape, rose 16 percentage points from 72.5% in 1995. So it was still high back in
still
1995.
Disturbingly high.
Yeah, to 88.7% in 2014. So almost 9 out of 10 victims are women.
2 decades, right? And a 16% jump there.
Yeah.
That's horrifying. And just to take a step back here, you said the 4 chief types of violent crimes would be murder, robbery, arson, and rape. For me, it's like, which one doesn't really belong here? Arson seems to stick out, but if you've been tuning into the vlog and This Week in Korean History that I do sometimes, arson is a very, very common way to lash out in society. You saw that with the Namdaemun fire back in the day, right? And the Daegu subway fire that killed hundreds of people.
True.
So arson is a really creepy way to go about it, and I guess it is a thing here in Asia.
As well, yeah.
Let's move on with more statistics.
Okay, so a Statistics Korea survey also showed that 67.9% of women responding that they felt fearful of crime in 2010. It's kind of natural when there's so much crime against women.
That corresponds
happening.
with the previous statistics.
Exactly. So, but this responding rates even have gone up. By 2014, the percentage was up to 79.6%. So nearly 8 out of 10 women feel fearful of crime just walking around the city.
That's horrifying. That extends to foreigners. We've had the foreigners, 2 foreigners in recent history been the subject of much controversy in how their rape cases were handled here in Korea, and that's absolutely horrifying. But let's get to the why question, right? Yeah. So why all of this right now? Why do men feel this way? What are the underlying factors? Okay,
so there are a couple diverse accounts, but one is that with the increasing rise of women's occupational status in the society, combined with the prolonged economic slowdown and fierce competition, of course, some sociologists analyze that misogyny has worsened incrementally, or kind of in proportion to this kind of a societal phenomenon. In the same way that, as you mentioned, that immigrants, laborers, or foreigners have been the blame of these societal problems. So we can say that hate against the society has been unleashed on women.
So long story short, one group is getting equality and the other group sees it not as getting equality, but taking part of my share.
Yeah. Which is very... it's not
so petty.
It's not a sound account to have, but
everybody knows what jealousy feels like.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And if you extrapolate that far, you can touch base with that feeling. It doesn't make it okay.
Especially in a society like Korea, where it's been dominantly a male-oriented society for a long time, and so that's why we see a similar phenomenon, or studies being published in Japan, neighboring country Japan, because Japan is also a very male-oriented society.
Indeed.
And there was a specific study by Ueno Chisco, who's a Tokyo University professor and an author of the bestseller book. After this incident, this book has been really higher up in the ranking of all the books being sold in Korea now. The book's title is Ona Girai Nippon no Misogyny, which is in Japanese, I Say No to Misogyny. And she basically backs the idea of misogyny being a product of weakened masculinity in Japanese society, with examples in which men are conditioned to hate women due to their lowered occupational status or their lowered authority.
I haven't read the book, obviously, but I would say that that's interesting in that, men here could also be seen as just another product of what's happening, right? As some men feel a certain way, it creates this atmosphere in which other men are raised, right? And I won't say men are victims here either, because that seems wrong to me. Yeah. But it doesn't seem no one's winning for sure, right? The misogyny, no one is winning for sure. Let's move on. I mentioned earlier that this is just one example. The Gangnam murder is just one example of, unfortunately, many. There was 2 recent rapes of foreigners. One I know it was by a group of Korean men in a Hongdae club.
Okay.
And the other one, I don't quite remember the details for. But let's get back to the Korean context here.
I said earlier that in recent 5 years, the violence against women had gone up by a notable rate. And other than this Gangnam murder case, there were two other very similar misogynistic violence crime cases. So in Cheongju last year September, there was an elderly man beating a woman senseless in just, out in the street.
I saw the video for that.
Oh,
yeah.
you did.
Yeah, it was horrifying.
And bystanders basically just watched what was happening and did not do anything. When the ambulance came, they said nothing was actually happening.
As far as the bystanders were concerned in the video, it might as well have not been happening with how nonchalant about it they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I understand you have another example for us.
Yeah. So in Ulsan, there was a similar case. So back in July, last July, there was a female college student who was stabbed to death in Ulsan after a drunken man randomly attacked her in the street when she was just waiting for a bus. And I believe she was 18 years old, so very young college student. And this drunken man who killed her was 23 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
Another Mujima murder sakan. So Mujima murder case, Mujima means don't ask. So it's just a random innocent victims, being involved in murder cases like this. And in this case, or in these three cases, they were all women victims.
Yeah. So we like to prominently feature the voices of Koreans, how they actually feel. And this particular instance is an interesting one because the online rhetoric contributes to the misogyny itself, right?
Yeah. And it has actually been happening over a long period of years, actually.
Yeah. If you lived in Korea, you're familiar with the name ilbae if you keep up on current affairs.
Yeah. And it's always in the center of controversies. And it's very notorious for anti-woman comments. And there was this one posting. This posting was titled "Men Should Not Help Rape Victims That Are Women," which is already very controversial.
There's no reasoning for that at all.
Yeah.
But okay.
And the posting was actually about how Korean women are generally advantage takers,
kind of like swindlers.
Yeah. And unfortunately, ever since this posting was kind of gained this momentum, there was all kinds of other hate comments against women. They even coined some new terms like 된장녀 and 김치녀. These two terms were actually out of this ilbe site.
These are historic terms kind of now. Like everybody kind of learns them nowadays, but I'm sure like there are a lot more newer terms that we won't mention here, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about ilbe. What is the ratio of topics actually about women and misogyny on ilbe?
So a study shows that 22 postings out of 25 most reply postings on ilbe are related to women, most of which are belittling women's appearances, behaviors, and their surface level values. It's basically generalizing all women kind of into this category of, all materialistic individuals. So that's very problematic. And
the other side of that, right? Women are depicted this way. How are men framing the rhetoric about themselves? What are men saying about themselves?
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. So they're basically saying, since women are taking advantage of their, societal or occupational status, their authority and all these things, or their money, they are basically depicting themselves as like naive, good-hearted, yet patient victims. And this is like, specific imagery that is being played out in this specific website. So I'm not saying
it's like a fairy
everywhere.
tale.
Yeah,
kinda.
but it's been very much the core of all the most replied postings and discussions. And so, this we can see that this is basically how online responses are creating this misogynistic, sort of sentiment amongst men.
This realm, this mindset.
Yeah.
Let's jump forward a little bit. Worthy of note. So we talked about ilbe. It's very, centered around masculinity, and in my my personal feelings, these false images, right? That's not really how the world is. But there's also other sites that have sprung up. The female iterations of ilbe, they do exist, like Megalia, I've heard of, right?
Yeah, it was actually created in response to ilbe.
Okay. So one gave rise to the other.
True.
Oh.
So it was,
You're just going down a hole here.
Very much the woman hater group, and Megalia is the male hater.
Okay, so hater. We have hate against females on ilbe, and hate against males on Megalia.
Yeah. Megalia, though, they were quite controversial for their plan to sue against Facebook because they were shut down. They think unjustly twice last year when
their Facebook page was shut down.
Yeah, their Facebook page was shut down when the other anti-woman pages were
they
not
remained
shut down.
Up there.
Yeah,
okay.
were not shut down. And so
has that started yet? That litigation?
Not yet. They're preparing for it. But what's very notable here too is they so in order to proceed with the lawsuit, they needed a funding, and more than 100 million South Korean won was funded through the crowdfunding.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think they're going to start the litigation pretty soon, but it hasn't been started yet.
All right. Let's move forward a little bit. How are we moving forward from this? I'm sure the government is thinking about solutions to this huge societal problem, right?
Yeah. Well, there were some initiatives that government tried to put in place to sort of protect women and to increase this public safety or public peace within Korea, within the country. But then it hasn't really been effectively used or.
What are some examples of these things? Because I've not heard of any. That's how ineffective it is. If you don't even hear about it, right?
Exactly.
So what examples are there?
I've heard of it maybe once, but never even thought that it was like something useful to actually utilize. So it's called 긴급 귀가 service. When women, they're on their commute back home, when it's really late, they can actually request a service to be escorted.
Oh.
Yeah, by the I think the subway station by the near subway station, like
it's like the walk from there to their home.
Yeah. Or police officers that are on duty, but then
that's such a band-aid response. It's not like it's not a solution. It's simply covering up the problem. It's a similar thing in where I'm from in the States, where you can try to do things like prevent sex crimes and rape by telling people, oh, watch your drink, be careful who you take a drink from, carry around pepper spray. But that doesn't get to the underlying problem of education, which I think is how any nation should be approaching issues like this, societal issues, educating people, just because women are more empowered lately doesn't mean men are any less empowered. Men have kind of held this role for centuries. It's not going to take a few generations for something to just turn upside down. And even so, like, why do you feel this way?
Right. It certainly wasn't a solution to the root cause, which they're now trying to do with all these public opinions kind of like on the rise. So the first thing they were going to look at was the service that they're gonna I think improve, or the main thing with this service, why it didn't really get used or even promoted widely amongst women, was that they actually really don't have the infrastructure to provide the service. And so
it's even worse.
There was an interview by a woman that attempted to use their service that was actually rejected, or she couldn't use it at all because basically this public service officer was saying they can't, they're tied
break
up
or whatever.
Yeah, so it's just a service that's to be out there but never to be used.
Yeah.
And so they're going to first look at this. I think the first step first attempt to really look at the root cause, and you mentioned education, and starting with that type of very fundamental solutions, is that we have to look at these misogynistic violence crime cases, or other cases or examples like online haterism against a woman through hate speeches or hate emotions on online sphere is by looking at the problem as not a human rights case or human rights issue, but as a societal issue. And so that mind shift or that awareness will start.
It'll get us on the right path, I guess, thinking the right way.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap this up. But first, I wanted to actually bring up this new article on the Joseon Ilbo. Actually, it came out on Friday last week. According to the Supreme Prosecutor's Office, the number of spontaneous assaults, so unplanned assaults, allegedly unplanned, surged fivefold from a little over 10,000, actually a little under 11,000 in 2004, 10 years later to 71,000. Wow. And, most of these victims are women, children, and senior citizens, right? A professor at Konkuk University has said people who are obsessed with the twisted notion that they must defeat others to succeed are expressing even minor grievances through physical force against the weak. It's very disturbing. That's a very common thing in domestic abuse cases as well. The victims are often women, children, and senior citizens. In a reversal, though, one high-profile case, a 30-year-old woman in Suwon actually attacked an elderly man for no good reason. She explained that she had grown angry after her clothing shop was closed because she just wasn't making any money, and the guy just seemed to look at her the wrong way, and that kind of set her off. Absolutely disturbing. Before we move on, Cathy, your opinion. The Gangnam murder case, an example of misogyny in society in Korea or an isolated incident?
I would definitely say yes, it is.
To being an example of misogyny?
Yeah, it is. And we can just clearly simply look at the fact that he let other men go and just picked one woman that was walked in, the first woman worked in, and he happened to stab her to death. So I
would say that he had to be at least a little bit mentally ill.
He is.
But I would agree that it comes from a place of misogyny. When we come back, we're going to be talking about quitting your job, how Koreans are doing it, and where they're going next. That's right after the break.
이번 역은 사당